producer is the world famous and fabulous Thomas Becker, also known as amadpainter. And our guest today is William Bill Konkolesky. He has been the state director of the Michigan chapter of the Mutual UFO Network since 2004. And after a lifetime of his own UFO and abduction encounters, he spent the last 2 decades actively investigating these otherworldly phenomena, trying to make some sense of the bizarre events that have happened to him personally. What he's discovered confronting these cosmic mysteries is that reality is far stranger than he could ever imagine. And he's the author of the autobiographical Experiencer Raised in Two Worlds, and his personal abduction experiences have been chronicled in the SyFy documentary Abduction Diaries. There's a DVD documentary, Abducted by Aliens, UFO Encounters of the Fourth Kind, and the ABC News special UFOs Seeing is Believing. And he's served as a consultant to the History Channel, Hangar 1, and UFO Hunters, and National Geographic Channels, and Truth Behind, as well as the science channels Uncovering Aliens and Close Encounters. Wow, you're the rock star, Bill. Before I bring you on, though, let me see sound check here with Dr. Sasha Lessin.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Listen,
Yeah.
Bill, what I'd like to hear from you is how MUFON has through its lifetime evolved in its interests and where it's going.
Okay, so
Yes.
thanks for having me on the show.
Welcome.
I have been part of MUFON since '93, so more than half of its 50 years, which it's celebrating right now. And so I do definitely have, I've had skin in the game for as long as possible, so I do feel like I can speak to that for sure. When MUFON started, it was focused expressly and explicitly on craft sightings or light sightings of unusual objects in the sky, and its whole reporting system and its whole sort of political makeup of positions. Everything was geared specifically towards people coming to us saying that we saw this light do a strange turn in the sky, we saw a full-on disc, we saw a triangle, all this sort of thing. And we would do the reports, diligently. It was at this angle, it was visible for this many seconds, it had this colored light, it did affect the electricity, it didn't affect the electricity, that sort of thing. And then what happened over time was that the abduction phenomena started to come in. People started to become more aware of the abduction phenomena. Now, people have been being abducted apparently for probably just about forever. I'm talking this phenomenon may have been even going back millennia, but in its current context, post World War II, it took a couple high-profile cases like the Betty and Barney Hill case and Travis Walton to sort of tease out of people that, oh my gosh, that those weird things that happened to me that I never spoke about to anybody, wow, that's happening to other people too. And then when the 80s hit and all the big blockbuster books came out from Bud Hopkins and Whitley Strieber, Ray Fowler, I could go on, John Mack, David Jacobs, there was just and I'm leaving out certainly some of the greats as well, just to make the point that the book market for those in the UFO community was flooded with the abduction phenomena, and suddenly all these people that either knew or believed that they had been abducted now were like, oh my gosh, that happened to me, that happened to me, that happened to me, let me get this off my chest. And suddenly MUFON was flooded with abduction reports. And here is a group that's reporting form is just all about lights in the sky or craft. When you have somebody give an abduction report, it's much different. because you could pretty much do a complete UFO report as a checkbox. Like, have a bunch of colors, you check off the box, time scene, check off the box, a bunch of closed-ended, real simple questions. But then when it comes to a contact experience or an abduction experience, you have a narrative. There is no easy way to capture that in a closed-ended question. It's rather lengthy, oftentimes, the report, and many times somebody who's been abducted once is a frequent flyer. Excuse the joke, that they've been taken many times, and they'll have basically a book's worth of material that they'll suddenly dump in the investigator's lap. This is what happened to me my whole life. And the investigators just got their jaw open, and they're like, how am I supposed to capture this report? And for the longest time, MUFON was certainly challenged, but is now catching up. The reporting forms now allow for a lot more flexibility in terms of the reports that are coming in. MUFON has certainly got its arms open to abduction and contact experiences, and we have our own experiencer research team, which is led by Kathy Martin, who is in fact the niece of Betty and Barney Hill. So we have a team together that does focus on the phenomena. Of course, what hasn't changed is the depth and the complexity of these reports. So they're not, if somebody is a field investigator, it's possible for them to knock out multiple sighting reports of UFOs in a single night. A couple calls to witnesses, or possibly a visit out to a location, or maybe it is such a simple case that it doesn't even require, much complexity, and they could, knock out, I did 2 UFO investigations today, and wrapped them up, and I'm pretty satisfied at the results. But a single abduction or experience account, that can go on for days, weeks, months, and, then suddenly you're writing the book of somebody else's life. and then suddenly, all the other UFO reports coming in are, you have to think, oh my gosh, what are we going to do with all these UFO reports now that every one of these abduction accounts fills up our time, takes all the air out of, our whole investigation to focus on them. And certainly the abduction, the contact events are generally much more interesting, and really, as Bud Hopkins once said, and I'm paraphrasing, if we're really interested in solving this mystery, what are we more interested in, the beings or what they drive? The beings, obviously. And so it creates quite a quandary. And so the way that MUFON, I think, has changed over the years is to really, while it questioned at one time how it was going to handle the abduction thing, it just right now in its current state is deciding that it's trying to embrace and take in all the abduction contact information it can, regardless of the weight of these reports.
Has there been a movement from frightening and frightened people who have been abducted to contactees who don't regard it as frightening, as are either neutral or ameliorative in some way?
Well, I think the types of experiences that people have been the same over many years, at least from the data that we get in. And I find myself in a curious position of trying to speak objectively about investigating a phenomena that is very subjective to me, because I fall into that category. But what we see is that people who've had positive experiences, they will be more open to report their positive experiences, because there's less fear, there's less shame, there's less guilt, there's less fear of ridicule, of somebody saying, I was taken aboard a craft in the middle of the night last night against my will, and they stripped my clothes and they poked me all over the place. What kind of response is anybody going to hope from that? From a small minority of people, though they may get due sympathy and compassion, but for a lot of people, they'll just hear, "What? This guy's crazy. He's saying he was yanked out and stripped and poked? What kind of fantasies does this nut job have?" And, so I think we see a disproportionate amount of positive over negative events reported simply because of, if somebody says they have a positive experience, "Oh, I was in bed last night and this beautiful light came to me and it was really peaceful." And people would be like, "Oh, okay, that's cool." They may not agree that that person is credible in their reporting, but it doesn't come with that same sort of shame and stigma and fear and negativity that does often happen in these experiences.
Okay, but what we found is that the people that believe they've been contacted by military personnel or CIA personnel tend to be treated more roughly than almost anybody else, and they are very, very likely to report negative stuff from our military. I don't know if you find that, but that's what we get from the people we've interviewed.
Yeah, there's a very limited. I'm speaking in the local market here in Michigan. Very limited amount of people I know that have that sort of military abduction experience, and yeah, none of them have been positive. I will agree with that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know that when we go beyond the data, we just go to your speculation. You know a hell of a lot more than we do, and I want you to, talk off the record and speculate too, about what trends you're seeing, what's coming down, and that kind of thing.
What? Try to figure out the best way to put this into words.
Yeah.
Is okay. So the phenomena is so broad, so with so many variables, and so much of it is two people can have the same experience and subjectively interpret it in two different ways, or maybe even at odds with themselves of how to put the right language to their experience. What during the 80s and 90s, when all the big abduction books were coming out, there was a sort of a crafted narrative, for better or worse. Whether or not these correct assumptions were as overreaching as they like to make you think or not. And when I say that, I say during that time, the abduction phenomena, it was told to people to be a hybridization project. Aliens were coming to Earth to take people, to make hybrids for some sort of future event, possibly a calamity on Earth, or possibly to populate other worlds out in the the galaxy, or even farther parts of the universe. And that was, really about it. That was the frame, if you will. And with that being the framework of people being told, this is what it's about, this is what the phenomenon is about, people would take that framework, they would read an abduction book, and they would say, "Oh, that person saw a mantis being. Isn't that crazy? I saw a mantis being. Wow, I'm not crazy. Somebody else saw a mantis being." So now that person's got that light bulb over their head, like, this is real. I should find out more about this. So what is this about? And then depending on the book they read, the mantis being, it could be a loving creature or a creature of fear. And most often it was seen as an icon of fear. And somebody running a hybridization project, overseeing a team of gray aliens running a hybridization project. So then simply because there's that confirmation, that somebody else saw that same type of being, that person has now bought into the framework, the narrative at the time. Now, what's happened since is those books have sort of faded into history a little bit, and you don't see a lot of those types of books out that stress that sort of hybridization project. And now people have a sort of a wide variety of interpretation of their experiences. And it's not to say the hybridization project doesn't exist. All evidence seems to point that something like that is part of the phenomena, at least as it pertains to a certain percentage of whomever is visiting the Earth. But it seems like the discussion no longer has a framework. And so there is a much greater variety in what's being reported. And I think that would be the best way to express the trend, is that there was more uniformity at a time when people were being told what the phenomena represented than now, where that message isn't being pressed as hard. People are taking their own interpretations and running with them. So it's, I think, ironically, a little bit more difficult to have a discussion about the phenomenon now than it was when, a few decades ago, when the investigators really started to turn their eyes towards abductions and contact and delve in that way. I would think that the trend just represents diversity.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we existentialists find is that people have differences in what we call confluence, how much they flow together with whatever they're last confronted with, and how much they have a rigid separation from that. And it's really something you can measure objectively. And so that's very interesting. You get people like Helen Keller who read a book by Cryptonesia, forgotten they read it, or that was read to them, and they think they wrote it. Or Bridie Murphy, who thought she was in ancient Ireland, and she was really just in the Chicago Exposition. So it's that is a measure. Different people have different levels of self-boundary, if you know what I mean. And so that's really something to be interesting for MUFON or other people to test for, is how confluent is this person and how individual and bordered he is in terms of his or her own self. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so we find people who whatever they heard last is what they think they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a degree of that. And so how do we ever determine that and separate that? Because there's always that element. I mean, before we had the first successful heart surgery, we didn't have any successful heart surgeries until, the transplants, until the first one happened. So we believe things that we hear, and the more we believe it, the more we create things. And so we're actually co-creating this reality. And for some reason, this UFO abduction contactee phenomenon is serving the totality of existence because it's growing. And people can hear a story and they either accept it or dismiss it. They integrate it into their psyche. It's like getting your guiding myth. It's like taking your archetype and embodying it. So a lot of people are resonating with the experience or phenomenon, and they're embodying it, and they're saying, yes, it happened. Now, are they actually, is this a phenomenon where memories are being triggered, or are they making it up? And if they're making it up and we're just co-creating that reality, it's very interesting to examine it no matter what's going on. For some reason, this is a hot story, a hot meme, and people are embracing it. So what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Back to somebody else. Like yourself, you have the story, right? So there you are, you have your lifelong story, and it's very easy for someone else to dismiss it and go, oh, that Bill, he's crazy, right? But, you have your story, and you don't want to be crazy, because that means, here comes the limit bit. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, and a little bit in the 80s, they used to lock us up, right? So nobody knows to be locked up and we can take it away. But then, we need to be able to explore this phenomenon. What is going on? Am I crazy? A lot of people go, well, I must be crazy. No, I don't think you're crazy. I think we're in a virtual reality, and we're deciding where the game goes next. So we like it. It's like Facebook. We like that. We like UFOs. We like abduction stories. Okay, so then we're getting more of what we like. So, and I can't really tell you at the end of the rainbow what's real and what isn't. It's not my job. Like, does it serve us? Does it serve us individually and collectively to have this story? So yes, but think about yourself. You have this job at MUFON. MUFON has 50 years of exploring this. You know, it gives a meaning and purpose and something to do while they're in this thing called life. And and it's an interesting story. And I just think we're making it up and creating it, but it does serve a higher purpose. It's entertaining, it's interesting, and human beings like it. Somebody else, take the ball. Bill, what do you think of that?
Okay, well, if this, I don't know, it either serves as an answer of sorts to what you've just said, or it complicates things much further. I think one of the confusing things too, it's not just a confusing thing about how people subjectively react to a phenomena that affects on this particular phenomena, but I also believe there is a great diversity of what is happening to people, and there's an expression that the UFO abduction researcher Paulo Harris says, all of the above, and I think it's probably the closest thing to a real answer. So when people say, are these things from another planet or another dimension? Are they time travelers? Are they us somehow? And I just love the answer. It's probably all the above. It's after all this time that the universe has been just vibrantly alive, you think of just an alien species that was born on another world somewhere and has had maybe just even 1,000-year jump on us technologically, what they'd be capable of, or you extrapolate that out, like maybe 1,000,000 years. Maybe there's species that have been flying around the universe for 1,000,000 years, and then you would think, what would be the limitation on a technological civilization that's 1,000,000 years ahead of us? There would be no restraint. I'm sure they'd be flitting around other dimensions, as probably has happened in other dimensions they've come here, probably mastered time travel in some respect. And then also, I really think that the way that evolution takes a technological species is that they're able to pop in and out their consciousness in and out of physical form, and that they exist primarily in a dimension of consciousness that just finds a way to physically interact with reality when it wants in a form that it chooses itself. And if they, for example, it just seems probably like the grays that are prevalent, they could just be like, yeah, this model seems to work best. This little model of puppet that we jump into seems to work best when we have to go down to the physical dimension. And if some other model works better, well, maybe you see that model. And then when people talk about, isn't it, crazy how many different shapes of UFOs people see? Well, just look at how many different models of cars are on the road right now.
Right.
As a comparison, I mean, you can't contain the phenomena. You can't say it's only these species. You can't say they only fly this type of craft. You can't say they're only extra planetary or extra dimensional or from this time or another time. You can't contain it at all. And the thing is, there's a real problem with language when it comes to describing the phenomena, because things are happening to people that our language has no words for yet. And so when that happens, people fill in the blanks in their narratives and say, this being came in through a portal of red light and touched me with a magic wand, which caused my body to vibrate like it was filled with bees, and somebody may describe in an entirely different way, or what have you. So it's any number of different things happening to any number of different people who subjectively respond to this wide variety of things happening. And it creates, I think the biggest problem is that there really is no good way to talk about the phenomena and really be you have to say something about it. You can't just not talk about it. That's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
You have to acknowledge that it exists, but what is happening? And and what is exactly what is happening is so impossible to put a real lexicon around, a real language around, a real consensus around, because it's all the above, and it's all the above, above and below, and but like I said, it's a big shame not to be able to talk about it. You have to be able to talk about it, even though you know, or you should know at heart, that you're just making wild guesses at what's happening.
Oh.
Yeah.
In terms of languaging, you use the term about how things evolve, but from my studies here on Earth, it's not that they evolve in this slow Darwinian incremental way at all, but it's punctuated by interventionism, and what the reports we get from the extraterrestrial reporters is that indeed it's deliberately, but we can still ask ourselves, are the interventions, do they overall create a system? And I think a system hypothesis that there's recurring regularities and variations within the system, they tend to organize it at increasingly inclusive levels, isn't a bad hypothesis. But so those are some of the ways that I would look at the question. Overall question is, does the overall thing form a system? Is God the overall organization comprehensive of everything or not? And if it is of everything, what about the things that aren't things?
Right. So, don't box it, allow it to unfold. You might want to go into those who want to video themselves. You can do Zoom and just be the historians. We don't have a conclusion. We're in the middle of the journey, and we're the largest organization on Earth. It's been collecting these stories for 50 years. We have our anniversary. And come on down. We'll have the cameras. We'll record you all. That's what I do in my shows. I record everybody. I listen to them. I don't judge them. I don't make them wrong or bad. I don't shame them. I just say, crank it up. Tell us more. Tell us the most bizarre. Well, this is bizarre. Okay, we'll listen to you. And it's almost like doing therapy for the whole world, because there's some message in there that's greater than the sum total of us all. That's just struggling to come out, and we can help us give birth to our new selves. And it's creating this story simultaneously everywhere. It's got some purpose for the story. That's my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Back to you, Bill.
Yeah, exactly. Embrace the mystery and just do your best. It's kind of tricky. Now, for me, to say this, okay, so my personal background is, my very first memory was at age 2 when a little gray guy came into my room. I remember it very distinctly. It wasn't something that ever went away. It wasn't something I remembered a couple years after it happened and said, oh yeah, I think I remember something happened back in my crib. No, it burned in my memory the very moment it happened, and I had, it was just a little gray guy came to my crib, looked down at me, and then walked out of the room. I screamed for my parents, who told me to go back to sleep. Never came to my room. God bless him. At age 4, I was lying in bed when 3 little gray guys came into my room. I was taking an afternoon nap. I had just laid down, like I had just basically hit the bed, and then felt an instant paralysis. And then they pulled me out of body and to do a little sort of exercise to see how I could handle myself outside of physical form. And, I had the experiences, and I certainly could go into detail about many of these when I was 7, 9, 10, a lot of my teen years and 20s. It tended to dissipate, drop off, after that to a great degree. But, I did my best, especially in what I have recorded in my book. The beings that I saw are clearly the beings that I encountered. I make no claims towards a bigger project of hybridization, even though I've seen a hybrid. So to me, I'm like, okay, so there is something to that. But it's just, I realize, of course, to some degree, I'm guilty of the language that was put out there. Now I saw but things happen. Like, for example, when I was a teenager, I had an encounter with a mantis-like being, actually like two. One was in my house very briefly, and then another one was on board. I was brought before a mantis being by the Greys to intimidate me because I was being very resistant in my teen years to the experiences that I was having. And this mantis being was very scary to me. It had a very intense energy and told me to go along with the program, and that if I did that, I would understand afterwards the value of just going along with the flow of things and how they were directing me, and not to put up any more hesitation or resistance. And I continued to put up more resistance, and I don't remember seeing a mantis being again after my teenage experience, but it was before I had even read what was really my first abduction book, which was Communion, Whitley Strieber's Communion. And then in his book, I'm reading, and at one point he mentions an experience with a mantis being, and he describes it exactly like the being that I had seen, and he even called it the same thing that I had been calling it. I had referred to it as a mantis, and I thought, how much even stranger that it was that he saw the same thing, but he called it the same thing. So,
I'd forgotten that. So I read Communion. So he had an experience with the mantis. I have to go look at that. I have that in my on my bookshelf. So what was his experience? Was it positive or negative? Or the mantis?
I believe it was negative. It's been. I did revisit. I read it back in the 80s, the first time, and then I revisited it once in the 90s and once somewhere between 2000 2010. So I have read it a few times, but I got to tell you, it's been more than 10 years since I read it. I just vaguely remember that it was negative, and very clearly remember that he did mention the mantis because of that. I not only had the same experience, the same being that he described, but I had also been calling it the same thing.
Interesting. And I had a negative. I had a positive experience with a mantis, and she helped me heal. I had an encounter with a boy that was, had molested me, and I wanted to go home and just die. I was very little. I was like 9 or maybe 10 years of illness. And so anyway, she came that night. I wanted to just die because I was so, humiliated. She came and she just held me all night. So I was the size. I'm like a 9 or 10-year-old average human female, and I was the size of an infant in her arms. So I'm trying to get the scale. She's probably 8, 9, 10 feet tall. But it was positive, so that's interesting. And that always, I get that as an interviewer. Like I talk to hundreds, if not thousands, of people that are having these experiences. I wonder how much is part of the personality that is experiencing it. And that doesn't. I don't want to make people victims, but there seems to be like people who go to like David Jacobs, or ones that they go to that type of therapist in order to have that type of experience, and it emerges as that therapist and that experiencer, comes together. So they have a certain type of experience that emerges because of the therapist. There's some kind of group creation there. So what they found in free is that the more people do work on themselves and they integrate and do regressions, the more their negative experiences turn around and they're actually positive. And so I wondered, maybe on some level, if you have somebody like the Dalai Lama has an experience with extraterrestrials, opposed to somebody that grew up, being subjected to satanic rituals or abuse. If part of their environment might influence the type of experiences and their perceptions once they encounter the extraterrestrial phenomenon. That's for both of you. What do you think?
Okay, so let me please jump in. So what I believe is that these beings are essentially beyond sort of an ego state where, we are very much locked into, myself, I am, a man who is middle-aged, who is a father, who is, has some skill with computers. I'm an Aries, I have these likes and dislikes, and I'm from Michigan, grew up here, all these little sort of things that are self-definitions. And, it's obvious to sort of lay out the whole argument for the ego piece, but I don't believe that these beings have that same sort of ego. I don't think they root for a particular sports team or, have the same sort of gender things that they need to wrangle with that we do on Earth, or probably since they've been all over the galaxy, possibly the universe, possibly other universes, that they really have a strong link to a piece of property somewhere that they think defines them. And I think they just are unlocked, the beings themselves, from a lot of ego. And so when they come and interact with us, exaggerate their
I'm sorry, I just lost what you said. Could you say? I heard you say when they come and interact with us, and then I was blank. Could you say that again? When they come and interact with us, what were you going to say?
How long was I blocked out? Of just a few seconds, or
You
so?
blocked out for about 90 seconds.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I believe they are beyond an ego state, almost in a sort of a perpetual, nirvana, if you will. They don't have the same ego issues that people do, and so they don't understand them. They are so beyond that sort of self-identification with with a gender, or where they're from, or their background story, their story. When they come to us, it's they are coming at a level beyond that baggage that we carry with us. So what I think is that when they interact with us, those people that have a very strong sense of their baggage, of who they are, where they're from, their interests, all those things that you look at and say, these are things that define me, I think that gap, the wider the gap is between egoless and complete immersion in the ego, I think the harder it is for the experiencer or the abductee. Because when a being comes to them, they're like, this thing is not from my planet. This thing does not look like me. This thing does not have similar interests as me. And you put you just have this long checklist of, nope, incompatible. And so it creates trauma, stress. Even the fact that the thing exists, something from my planet doesn't exist, that's an affront.
Right.
To take it, to an extreme. And those people who are possibly on a path of, peace and, less ego and more compassion, just basically it's an ego scale thing. I think that when Free talks about people being cool with their experience, it's a couple things. One is, it's like I mentioned before, people are probably more likely to talk about a happy experience than a negative experience. So the data is skewed towards positive experience already. However, when somebody works through their experiences, it's a lot like people working through any sort of things where, like, our culture has changed in terms of, if you look over, the course of the 20th century and all the civil rights, changes that happened, or even the 21st century, all of that. There are people who were brought up to say, this is how it should be, and then suddenly civilization, society just gets turned on its ear to them, and they're like, I'm having trouble accepting this change in my personal society. And so I think but people work through it, all the people that, for example, that were opposed to gay marriage, just to use a single example, and suddenly it was the law, but that didn't mean that people were changed or conditioned, to accept it just simply because the law changed. Those who were in opposition to it, they had to come to terms with it. And I believe, I'm making an analogy to the abduction experience in that, well, it's a reality. Now you have to come to terms with it. And those people go on a journey of coming to terms with their abduction experience. And then, the journey basically is a turn for the positive. They learn to let go of their ego because they're faced with something that's so unequivocally against what they think the universe should be like, that they have to, that is the one path of peace to them, is to go in that direction. Otherwise they go crazy. If they close in harder and just become completely, I guess, xenophobic, to use the proper term for it, then life gets harder and harder for them. But for most people, I think they do find it as a path towards less ego, and because of that, then even if their experience may have been negative, they may have been taken aboard against their will, stripped, and had some sharp thing stuck in them, but the only way to find any peace in it is to say, I am not my body, I am a field of consciousness, etc., and then you lose some of that pain and fear that gets associated with that. And so I think that is one of the things that Free riffs on well. And one of the things that I think I see in a personal, in the experiencer community, especially locally, is that people have positive or negative experiences, and then they all go on the same journey because they lose their luxury of disbelief that there's life out there, because it's meaningful to them, because it happened and they can't deny it. So they have to do something with that experience to be able to just survive, and then often they grow.
Bill, I find that it's really useful to understand that the sense of I, or ego, isn't really unitary. And if we really extend, you've said as above, so below, as within, so as, and without, and as we are, so are other people. Well, we find in the idea of parts or subpersonalities that we have more than one ego, and we can center ourselves. And if you really let yourself understand that there's a fractal of everything in the universe, every archetype that there could be within you, then if you go within, then you have nothing to fear from a apparently bizarre other, because all you need to do is to find that part of you that can resonate, because it's in you too. And if you have that kind of orientation, there's a resonant part of me within the part within me that can feel oneness or a coherent field or love with anyone and anything, I think you're free.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that's certainly one way to express the path, the key to growth from an experience. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, Janet, are you there? We may have lost you. Are you there, Bill?
I'm here. I was on mute. Sorry, I muted. So I just wanted to say it seems that humanity is growing and evolving because they're coming to the place where they can witness these stories and listen to them and no longer just judge them and put them in the giggle factor. And that's in part because of the work of the UFO. I remember back in the late 80s, I think it was, I was in State College, Pennsylvania, 89, maybe 90, 91, and I had, I told my story as an experiencer, and I know back then it was all nuts and bolts, but I had a wonderful person, and I got a room I worked at Penn State University, somewhere one of the offices. I got to meet there, and he interviewed me, and I think he recorded it, and it was just very powerful to be witnessed and not judged. And I don't remember the person's name, but he told me about the MD-12, which I was aware of, but he said that the former president of Penn State University had an office in the university. And lo and behold, within a week when he was telling the story, he didn't tell me about it. He had interviewed the president of he was no longer the current president. He was a tenured, or what do you call it, a professional emeritus. He interviewed him, and he was coming out about being the recording secretary for MJ-12. But then when this UFO guy went back to him, he denied it all. Because somebody got to him and said, "No, you can't come up with this story." And within a week of us having this discussion, I get an envelope to deliver, and I was working at the university. I go, and it was the office, this guy's office, and he wasn't there. But I thought, oh, maybe I'll picture it to you. But I was walking in his office, and it was kind of ironic and spooky. That happens so soon. Anyway, back to the now. There's a little aside. So we have a few minutes before the break. Would you like to tell us more of your story, Bill, and how you ended up getting involved with MUFON, and how these experiences as a contactee has affected your life and made you who you are today?
Well, when I was growing up, there was a lot of other paranormal things going on in the house, and so sometimes it was difficult to find a boundary to how much the poltergeist activity was related to ghosts, or possibly the UFO activity, or some other psychic stuff going on. And I read the book Communion over the course of a weekend, which was a record for me in terms of how quickly I read a book. And then when I got the book Transformation, Whitley Strieber's sequel to that, I read Communion so fast because I was looking for happy answers to my issues and didn't find them. And so I read Transformation much more slowly, very slowly. And I would read a chapter and sometimes go a couple days to a week, whatever, before reading the next chapter, because I was afraid of all the confirmations I was getting from that book. He would talk about experiences that I'd had, and would correlate, and I'd be like, oh my gosh. So I was afraid to get to the end of that book, and because I thought I was going to get hit with some sort of whopper, like, oh my gosh. It was a tough time trying to make my way through that book, and I was one night when I was reading, he was talking about telepathic messages that he would receive, and like, hey, would be like, hey Whitley, come to the park, and I remember reading that, thinking, I'm like, wow, I've never gotten any sort of just random telepathic messages from out of nowhere. That's not one thing that I've experienced. And then right when I thought that, this thought pushed into my head that was not of my own origin. I don't know how best to describe it. It felt like an email or text popping into my head that said, finish the book and we will prove to you that we exist. So then I started reading the book really slow, even more slowly. And the day that I got all the way to the last chapter, and I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't finish the book. And then I had a dream one night that I did finish it, oddly enough, or agreeing to a dream that I finished a book. But when I woke up the next morning, I'm like, okay, that means today is the day I finished the book. and it was in the morning. It was about 9 in the morning, and I finished the book, and I'm like, oh my gosh, now what? Now what's going to happen? They said they proved to me they exist. What does that mean? So I was on pins and needles all day, just really nervous about what that meant. And later that night, I'm like, well, there's no way I'm hanging out at home alone. Well, I'm going to hang out with friends. And just to put it into some sort of time context, I was a senior in my high school experience at the time. I was in my senior year, and I went out with two buddies, and the three of us saw over our car this blue ball of light about the size of a car, sort of football shaped, do this sort of tumbling motion slowly over the car. Then a white ball of light zigzagged all over the sky, and in the middle of the sky a red light appeared and disappeared. This was the day I finished the book, that same night, after all that time of having that message stuck in my head. Finish the book and we'll prove to you that we exist. So, and then I went to work the next day, and I found out another coworker had actually seen it from somewhere else. They lived several miles away and saw something very similar. They saw the blue light. So, to me, at that point, I'm like, well, there's no denying it anymore. I have two, I suppose you could count 3 witnesses to the event. And every time I start to think, well, these types of things aren't UFO related, for example. I go back to that particular event. And so it being a UFO sighting, I went to MUFON and I reported it. And I appreciated the way they handled my sighting, and I decided to become a member, and I've been on board, excuse the pun, ever since.
Wow. And you ended up being the director, which is very interesting. But before we get there, I just wanted to say, we have 2 minutes. When I was reading Whitley's Communion, they talked about how the UFOs and the ETs affected the electronics, and so I put that book down on that page, and then in the middle of the night, my TV turns on by itself, and it's all the way up max, which I don't even ever do, right? And it's like blaring throughout the house. And the bedroom was downstairs, and I told my husband at the time, I'm not going down there. You're going to turn that off. So I made him go down. The bed was freaky. Okay, we have 2 more minutes before the top of the hour and the commercial break. So you joined MUFON.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you get from being just a member to we may not finish it, but we'll pick it up after the break.
Oh, I could just probably touch on that pretty quick. I became a field investigator, did some investigations. I did the local chapter's newsletter. I became MUFON.com's webmaster at about year 2000 and did that for 5 years. And then the state director, who was retiring in Michigan, asked me if I wanted to become state director. I said, what? Are you serious? I didn't expect the invitation. And so I thought, well, I'll let it go. He was probably just being, just putting the feelers out. And then he asked me again, and I'm like, oh, he is serious. And I said, let me think about it. And then he asked me yet again, because I said to myself, if he asks me a third time, I'll do it. And he did. And so I didn't think I was ready for it. And, it's a learning experience like all things. But now 15 years later, I'm the longest Michigan MUFON state director in the history of our state chapter. So yeah, I'm loving every minute of it. It's real adventure.
Wonderful.
And never a dull moment.
Yeah. Michigan, from my studies, I'm an anthropologist, is a hotbed of all kinds of stuff and has been for a long, long time. Do you find that too?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of fantastic, big, well-known UFO events in Michigan.
Aloha. Welcome back to Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio. And I'm your host, Janet Karen Lessin, with my co-host, Dr. Sasha. Alex Lessin. And our producer is Thomas Becker, amadpainter. And our guest is William Bill Konkolesky. And today we're talking about MUFON and experiences. But before we get back to our show, I'd like to remind everybody to please go over to that donation button on revolution.radio and make your donation, because we really need your donation. We just got a new server and we got lots of interesting problems, but we need to do well, but we do need your donations. So, amadpainter, how are we doing?
Interesting is the least describing.
Very interesting.
Yeah, we've got $728 so far this month, which is a little bit above average, but that was thanks to an angel donor, and we sure appreciate it, by the way. But we could use your money. We had to come off an extra $200 a month to re-register all the software on Studio B, so we really do need your money.
Yes, thank you for donating. Thank you. Sasha, back to you. What did you want to ask? I'm talking during a break.
Oh, yeah, well, Bill, I'm really curious on your take about compare and contrast disclosure from the government and its sources with the kind of information that you've been getting and the other MUFON directors have been getting.
Well, are you saying compare what has been disclosed?
Yeah, right. Are they slanting information in a way that this is the direct experiences? That's my hypothesis.
Yeah, I would say, their primary directive would be to, it's basically saying, do no harm. So I think they want to put as tight control over any release of information of the subject as possible. And this might almost be obvious. They really want to wrap it tight and watch to make sure that something doesn't get out that's even construed as ambiguous on the part of the government or the military. They are they are sitting on obviously a ton of information, a ton of data that's accurate and credible, and it's for them to just allow the dam to even just get a little hole in it is really going to be tough for them to maintain the disclosure at a level that they would feel that they would have any control over. When you compare what the government or military says to what you see at the grassroots level, in Michigan we get about a couple hundred sighting reports a year directly to our state chapter. Most of them can be identified, but enough of them can't, and some of those are just very highly interesting. It's like what Stanton Friedman had said once. He's like, there could be 1 million, and I'm paraphrasing, 1 million UFO reports come in, and if just even one of those is real, then there you go, checkmate. And we get several a year that are credible and seem to be, just absolutely beyond any sort of explaining away as an airplane or something. Like a satellite or celestial object or weather phenomena, etc., whatever. I mean, these are clearly some actual phenomena coming on, and every state's got their own, and they get them every year, and the information just piles up. And for me, I don't indulge in a lot of the conspiracy side of things simply because my own personal background. I've experienced it. The reports we get in at a local level are fantastic, and what the government says or doesn't say, or the military says or doesn't say about the phenomena, to me it's representative certainly of what they wish to say or what they want to withhold. But a lot of people seem to be hanging out there. People that really aren't invested in the UFO game seem to be hanging on what the government says or doesn't say, or what science says or doesn't say about the UFO phenomena. like they're like, well, when science admits it's true, then it's true. When the government comes out and says it's true, then it's true. That's sort of a thing. But it's just, go ahead.
My hypothesis is that the release of further information is inhibited because it covers up criminal activity like kidnapping and murder and taking away citizen rights of human beings. I think that they're covering up criminal activity.
And it would be at such a level that there would be no way to prosecute it fully or even a fraction. It's like, this. I mean, imagine like the war crime trials that happened after the Second World War. I mean, this would be well beyond, the mass court, finagle that happened after something like that. This would go back generations. This would include,
yes,
so many individuals that what could you do? It would be so at such a level that the government would essentially just say, well, it's broken. All these people are lying, are criminals, and doing horrible things to people. And then where do you go from there? Where do you go from there?
I think the only way out is truth and reconciliation. Tell the truth, no punishment. Just let humanity live with the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So to a family that's had somebody as a member of their family who's been claiming all their lives that they've been taken by the military and abused, do they get reparations? It's really weird. They'll be able to provide a story which dovetails with what possibly gets released in some form of disclosure. Not to say that the worst parts of it are going to be disclosed first, second, or third, but once the depths of this start to be unloaded on the public, then if somebody remembers being a military abductee, okay, now prove it, and try to take the government to court over that. But that, and everybody would know, like, oh my gosh, these stories are true. What a mess. Yeah.
Yeah, and so ultimately, the only way out of it is to make sure that everybody is compensated with, everybody on the planet is compensated with a decent living, and so that there's no problem of liability, but everybody's taken care of. That's the only way I see out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, because they are guilty, and the truth has been denied to us for so long. And if we had the truth, we'd have a different reality. We'd have cures for diseases. We'd have spacefaring technologies that we would be using. So it really has harmed all of us and really alive being denied the truth, except for those that benefited from it, and they were able to hoard great wealth and control the population. So yeah, that's probably the only way out is truth and reconciliation and some kind of paying back. They certainly have enough trillions and whatever of money that they could compensate everybody. Probably wouldn't be much for them to do some kind of compensation. But my question is, how does MUFON work with other organizations like Free and To the Stars Academy? It seems like everybody's vying for the narrative, I call it. They're trying to take control of the narrative. We've got all these people are coming out about the secret space program. We have all these whistleblowers that are coming forth on their deathbeds and talking about the military involvement with extraterrestrials and the extraterrestrial presence that's been here all along. And I don't know if UFO is addressing that or just going, it doesn't exist in the radar. Since you're a director, how is MUFON dealing with all these people that are coming forth with their various stories, which do include a breakaway civilization and the secret space program?
Well, MUFON's whole, there's a bunch of places to jump in on this, and I'll just pick on this as almost randomly. That a couple of years ago, MUFON's whole symposium in Las Vegas was the secret space program. Like every single speaker spoke about aspects of the secret space program. Now,
I was there.
and so how does MUFON, and also on Hangar 1, if you watched enough episodes, you'll see some of the secret space program on those episodes as well. It's difficult for, we're being an all-volunteer army, it's difficult for investigators to investigate, these types of accounts, because, you got somebody with a 9-to-5 job, they scraped up enough money for the field investigators, guide, and, they're doing their reports, and then, they get hit with a whopper of somebody that comes to them and says, yeah, I was part of the 20 and Back program. And, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I was going to watch, reruns on TV Land tonight, and then suddenly you hit me with this. What do I do with it? And so MUFON, as I was saying a little bit earlier, has made steps to come from investigating sightings of craft to investigating sightings of abductions as a big step. Now, larger scale stories like this, when they come out, that takes a whole sort of special projects team to address things like that. And from what I've seen so far, MUFON is open to letting people air these accounts within their sphere, in their newsletters, in their conferences, on their television shows. But these are very difficult things to actually investigate. So I believe that MUFON plays a good neighbor in allowing some of these messages to access through the membership through its own official channels. But I really don't know how a lot of these investigations could even take place. So, and with regards to MUFON's partnership with other organizations, the Center for UFO Studies, the National UFO Reporting Center, NIDS at one time, these are National Institute of Discovery Sciences. These were all, good partnerships. UFO and Newport, still, they coexist nicely and work well with one another. Free is an interesting thing. I haven't actually got much of a perspective from the higher ups in MUFON on their thoughts about free, though I did speak at a conference myself in 2014 where Ray Hernandez was also one of the presenters, so I got to meet him personally, and he's a good guy, and I don't think that MUFON is generally against anything. I don't think MUFON puts up a fight against a lot of things in terms of other organizations, other research. Sometimes if somebody's not being above board with what they're doing, if they're being dishonest or somehow not playing nice, then certainly those opinions are going to come out. But I don't see it as a world of MUFON versus this organization or MUFON versus that organization.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead,
Sasha.
I was very struck at that Las Vegas talk when Bill Tompkins was speaking, and others, that the moderator of the panel that I was listening to with Bishago and others on it did not want to hear anything about a direct experience or the communication by the real women to Tompkins, and I got a real feeling that MUFON was hostile. And you're telling me that isn't the case. That's interesting. That's one thing. But the other thing is this panic factor that the government and others say, well, we don't want to make people too frightened. And I did some research on the H.G. Wells things that everybody talks about. It seems like Roosevelt was appraised of the E.T. presence, and he wanted to go public, and they said, well, wait a minute, let's do a test thing. And they hired Orson Welles to do H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds in the New York, Jersey area, and there was some panic, and it was by the way it was staged, And Roosevelt said, yeah, we better keep it all secret. But it's bullshit. We're not afraid. Gosh, we have missiles that are supposedly coming at us and shot down all the time and stuff like that. Our lives are instantaneously threatened. For heaven's sakes, we can deal with whatever comes up. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So back to you. What would you like to add to this conversation? I'm getting feedback again. Go ahead, Bill.
See? Well, a couple other, a few things to work in with regards to disclosure. Big topics, all of them, are if UFOs, of course, what I'm talking about is if the government comes out with disclosure that UFOs exist, and it's used, that would mean that all the current existing infrastructure about how energy is created and provided on Earth, that is just going to be swept away overnight, and all the economic ties that are there with regards to the current way that energy is created and provided, that is going to be just earth-shattering in terms of economics. And then just being, it's going to lay waste to the current, economic structure. The other, and a very related thing, is just the stock market in general. The fear of oh my gosh, we're not the only ones out there. What does that mean? What does that, and so it doesn't take much to give the stock market the jitters. And then lastly, also, it would be, a situation where the governments of the world would be saying, there's others out there that can outclass us militarily, and really there's not a whole lot we can do about it. So just so you know that, you'd like to have that sort of bit of comfort thinking that your government's got your back, but really, we kind of don't. They can do whatever they want to you, just so you know. There would be so many negatives that would just be crushing. And here's just another part of that is that religion, that people's religious belief. I was raised Catholic. Nowhere in my years when I attended Catholic Church were they talking about UFOs and extraterrestrials. So now, you take, the comments like Balducci and stuff, and saying that they're open to the idea of extraterrestrials out there and everything like that. But really, there's not a lot in a lot of religions that take into account people not being the only thing going. It would fundamentally change so many religions and so many people with strong religious beliefs that would be another issue. And then just lastly, to throw on for a bit of spice, is that a lot of people will just riot for any reason. Their sports team loses, they riot. Their sports team wins, they riot. So aliens are real. Aliens come out as real. There will be a percentage of people out there that are going to riot.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
okay.
we got over Santa Claus. Wait, my turn. I think we got over Santa Claus for a bit over those new ETs. I think that we need to have other energy systems and the technologies because our planet is, we're losing so many species. The oceans are dying, and we're going to get to the point where we're going to starve unless we figure out other systems and figure out what's going on with the global changes. I don't want to call it heating or warming or cooling. It's just, obviously, there's changing, there's pollution. We need some solutions, and they do require we go outside of the box. And part of the solutions are going to be from these technologies that already exist that are being utilized. And so I think it's inevitable that it will come out. Actually, when I was on a panel with Randy Kramer, they were talking about the panic factor and all that stuff. And so I can't remember the stats, but it'll take about 3 months for those people to adjust. And yeah, there might be some, and they're trying to minimize those. They're going to jump off of buildings like they did during the Great Depression. But you're not going to save everybody unless maybe this introduction to science fiction through these conferences will reach a sufficient critical mass point where at least somebody knows something about it, and so when it happens, they'll be able to comfort those who are totally caught off guard, it's like 6 degrees of separation. Maybe you probably don't believe it, but your mother does, or your son does, or somebody does, and they can say, okay, let me educate you on this real quick. Mom, don't jump off the bridge. So I think that we do need to do this. It's critical at some point, and it will happen. So that's my opinion. Who's next? Sasha, back to you.
Yeah, I would just like to say something about the threatened demise of religion as a result of UFO and alien disclosure, and I think that indeed it would destroy I'm a student of Zechariah Sitchin, so I'm really immersed in the data of what we call dominator consciousness, which is the consciousness of the Anunnaki-generated religions against which Jesus and Buddha rebelled, basically. But the real hierarchical ones are going to suffer because Buddha and Jesus are just both saying the same thing, that all beings are deserve equal respect and none is better than the other. And that's a big, big thing. And the religions that make people feel inferior and downscale, being gone would free us, I think. React.
Okay, back to you, Bill, or amadpainter. Do you want to add your 2 cents? Thomas likes to interject now and again if he's there. Are you there, Thomas?
Yeah, I'm here. I find this all intriguing, but I just don't understand the why. I mean, why do they keep it secret? Why aren't we out there? I mean, we should be out there. I mean, it's our birthright to be part of all this. Or it should be, anyways.
Oh.
So, what's your, Bill, what do you think? Why is this being repressed? I mean, you mentioned your thing, the religious,
that's something else that
makes sense, yeah.
That's something that doesn't make sense to me, because I mean, when you look up at the sky and you see them points of light up there, to us it's just a point of light, but when you look at it through a telescope, there's planets out there. Why would it all be out there if there wasn't more to the universe than us being the center of the universe?
Sure. To give an example about reasons or evidence of resistance to releasing information about UFOs as it pertains to energy. I'm sure you probably hear all those stories too. Somebody invents a tire that won't puncture, and then they patent it, and then the automotive industry buys that patent from the individual, and you never see that tire that will resist a puncture, or cars that run on exotic fuels that aren't gasoline.
Well, wouldn't that technically be crimes against humanity, though?
That's business. I mean, I'm not defending it, but if somebody patents it and they accept the offer from somebody who's willing to buy it off of them, there you go. Then it's a matter for the courts. Certainly, it's crummy, no doubt about it. That's an understatement, but without using four-letter language. But it's just the way that the economy works. So I'm surprised that we even have as many electric cars as we have now, with all the resistance to that was put up. But it just seems like those are some small examples that anything that would mean less money for the automotive industry. The automotive industry just jumps in and says, well, let's take that. We want people to buy tires. We need people to buy tires. So let's take these puncture-free tires off the market, and that way people will continue to buy tires. People's whole careers are based upon that mentality. Like, we have to protect our industry, and when we detect a threat to the industry, we can, let's try to take out that threat. So, on the very small nickel and dime level, you're seeing this type of thing. On a broader scale, what would happen if somebody said, forget gasoline altogether? you think of all the people who have their hands in that industry that rely on gasoline and oil and you know, just the whole fossil fuel thing. They would throw everything in their power at the threat to make sure that their industry survives and their livelihood survives on an economic basis, even if they would think, well, geez, yeah, it'd be nice if I had.
They destroy the planet.
Yep.
Even if they destroy the planet, so it becomes a point where it's unsustainable. Though I mean, it's becoming unsustainable. We obviously have something going on. We are losing so many species, and soon there's no longer enough food to feed us. There's no fish in the sea, all this stuff. I mean, it's not it's criminal to kill off the whole species. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's it. Maybe there is a negative species that wants to take over prime real estate Earth and wants us to die off. That's one of the theories too. And I know it's a conspiracy, but it doesn't make sense for us to keep going the way we're doing when we know we're creating great harm. And so you can't justify, making we have to shift into making a living in other ways besides fossil fuels. So we have to start thinking outside of the box and into a systems analysis of our whole system designed around something other than a fossil fuel-based economy or a war-based economy. So we have a fossil fuel war-based economy, which is destroying the earth and killing people. So just because it's what's been done all along doesn't make it right. And we need to start, all of us, individually and collectively, insisting that the truth come out and that we have these other technologies. They're already out there. As we're aware of them, people die. And, whistleblowers are dying, come out and say, I worked on this program, this, and that. So somehow we just have to say, enough. I'm tired of you killing off, my mother, my grandmother, my grandfather, now me. I'm dying of cancer that could have been prevented because we have the cures for those diseases, and we have other systems that are cleaner and greener that won't destroy our environment. So this is the time. We're reaching that period where we can't justify, rationalize it, and make excuses for it anymore. We just say, stop the insanity. It's time to change gears and switch into another system that honors all life and allows us to live with dignity, beauty, grace, and integrity. So, anyway, that's my thoughts.
Well, that's why I said it was a crime against humanity, and I don't think that should be allowed, regardless if business is involved or not, or high profit.
There is the problem is that there is a mechanism in place to hold 20th century, mentality in place. There really isn't a mechanism to change that. There isn't a government official or a government body or anything like that that's organized and saying, let's be done with that and let's look to something else. I mean, you maybe get some lip service like saying, yeah, alternative energies are a great thing. Let's throw up a few more windmills and this and that and whatever. And it's all a bunch of lip service. There really isn't a counterweight to the industry that's holding a lock on it. And it's great. And those who aren't really down in the, in any capacity to actively make active change. I mean, you've got public sentiment, but what is the actionable part of this public sentiment? We just, we complain, but that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, you're talking about the real political world, and I can really dig it. But I can tell you one thing that we anthropologists have found is that if you balance technological innovation with social services intelligently, you retrain people, you readjust people for the artificial intelligence that's going to be doing all the boring work. That just because we have a formula doesn't mean that we have the will to do it. But it's obvious, like Janet is saying, that we're going to be destroying ourselves. I look at somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she's saying, do a systems analysis of the entire thing, and then you're going to be able to handle it instead of going one industry at a time. We're all in this together.
Yeah, there's people that are coming up with solutions. It seems to be the younger generation. There's the Greta, young lady from Switzerland, and she's organized people to protest. They take off every Friday, and so she's got a huge movement going I'm looking at the young candidates like what's his name? He's a Chinese American, and he says give everybody $1,000 a month and go for the real source of the jobs that are being lost are being automated. So he's going to people like Amazon, and they're making trillions and trillions of dollars, and they don't pay 1% of taxes, and they could finance this $1,000 a month per person in the United States, which would go back into the economy and allow people to boost the economy, and it would be a win for all. So we're looking at solutions outside of the box, and I am working with a physicist who is reinventing. He was in a 20-back program. He's reinventing the technologies he was exposed to, because apparently they're governed by these contracts, which doesn't allow us to use these industries because of the treaties and the agreements. But there's nothing to prevent him from reinventing them. So he's starting, and he's got 2 or 3 patents pending, and there's something going on in the East Coast. I think it's down near you. They have the new NASA facility, and they said they're going to get back to the moon within 5 years, and so they're looking, in order to do that, into the free energy technologies, because the rocket stuff, all the scientists there at the facilities are saying, come on, we can do better than rockets. We know what we can do, and they're asking our government to allow it to come out. So it may come out because they want to win the space race. America is behind, and there's a push to win the space race, and so you're not going to win it with rocket technology. So we have to go to the next level, which is the free energy systems. So that's what I heard. Could be true, could be not, but that's what my sources are telling me. Mm-hmm. Okay. So who wants to interject something else? Do you want to continue your story? And so, what you learned see, that's unusual for you to be a MUFON director and a contact experiencer. I just find that to be so interesting.
Yeah, I want to know if your kids are affected. Do they take your kids too?
Well, what I always say is that I am completely open about what happens to me, but I do not mention my family, whether or not anything has happened to them. My children are in elementary school right now, and certainly, this is, if anything were to be happening to them, I would not say it. So, yeah, I will say as much as this. It runs on my mother's side of the family, and it runs on my wife's father's side of the family. I mean, I guess I'll get, as open as saying that. With regards to my immediate family, besides some of the strange things that had happened to my mother and the extended family out that way, I have 4 older brothers. I am the youngest of 5 boys, no girls in the family. So my 2 oldest brothers have had a ton of experiences themselves. And then the next 2 brothers, between them, 0. And then I come along, and then I am, neck and neck with my my oldest brothers in terms of experiences, which is just bizarre in itself. Now, when I was growing up, I would talk about my experiences. I would tell my brothers, I would tell my parents, and they would just be like, "Oh, that's very interesting." And there was no pushback. There was no trying to explain it away, and there was, due comfort given to me about talking about what happened to me, but I never heard their stories until I was in my teens. And then my mother had, said to me, well, these things had always been happening, but we didn't want to scare you or affect you in any way. So we, the family kind of held back until I was in my teens. And then I got to find out about, all the things that had been happening with my family. Now, my oldest brothers, have a great deal of psychic activity that I don't seem to have inherited as strongly. Not to say that I don't have my I can't pull my weight in that respect. But like my second oldest brother, he was going through a phase where he was able to have out of body experiences with fairly easy and with regularity. And my oldest brother has been particularly lucky at lottery and things like that. That would have been a nice one to pick up, but.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and it's in my family. My cousins have had experiences. I love to tell the story of what happened to my cousin one night, and I think she enjoys it. I tell her story too. So it was 1976, and she lived in an apartment with her husband, and she was pregnant, and it was a very hot summer night, and so she was up at 2 a.m. And the apartment that they lived in had a courtyard in the middle and parking around the exterior of the apartments. So she was looking out the window, sitting on the couch, lights out, looking out at the courtyard, the interior courtyard of the apartment. And she saw a man dressed completely in black, black gloves and everything, and had a black helmet on that she said looked like a motorcycle helmet, except it was extraordinarily oversized. We're talking about like dark helmet from Spaceballs, just giant helmet, oversized helmet. And she's watching him out in the courtyard, and he would like take a few steps and he would stop, and then he would like spin around, and then he would take another few steps, and he would pause and he would spin around, and he kept doing this all over the place. She's like, what the heck is up with this guy? So she wakes her husband up and says, look at this character out here. And he says, well, it is just past 2 a.m. The bar's just let out. We probably got some drunk motorcycle guy just wandered in, to our apartments, and, is just making a fool of himself. And so they're watching, and then the guy starts really doing like a tornado thing, just starts spinning around and spinning around and spinning around with his arms out. And so my cousin's husband says, yeah, okay, this is starting to freak me out a little bit too. It's not like we can easily go to sleep with this guy walking around out there. He goes, I'll go out and I'll have a word with him. And so he steps out, they just think it's some drunk, and so he steps out of the apartment, and as he steps out, his next door neighbor comes out the door too. Apparently they were also watching this guy, and so they're like, okay, the two of us will go and approach this guy and see what his deal is. So they start walking out to the middle of the courtyard, and as they're about half the distance between their apartments and this guy, another neighbor comes out of his apartment a few doors down with a shotgun. And so they're like, well, we don't know if we want to escalate it to that point. And the guy's like, well, if you guys, whatever, don't want to talk to this guy, I'm going to talk to him. So the three of them, have formed this little mini posse now, including having some guy with a shotgun. And they walk up to this guy in the motorcycle helmet, dressed all in black. And he watches them, and he's watching them approach. And as they get to, I don't know how many yards, but pretty close, he suddenly bolts and starts running at top speed. And almost like some sort of instinctual response, they all start these other three guys start chasing him. And they go running, and these three guys are chasing this guy with the helmet. And if you can visualize what I'm talking about, an interior courtyard to a sort of a rectangular shaped apartment complex with the parking on the outside, there are tunnels that lead out to the exterior of the apartment complex, at intervals so people can get out to their cars. And so they are chasing this guy, and as the motorcycle guy gets into the tunnel, he vanishes into thin air. He doesn't run out and get into the parking lot and then disappear. He just absolutely vanishes, and all three of these guys saw it happen. So yeah, that was. So stuff like that, has happened.
Any idea what it was? Some kind of extraterrestrial? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my cousin, she's seen a lot of spirits. She has a lot of experience seeing members of the family that have passed and communicating with them. But in terms of anything like this, there isn't anything else like this that she's been able to share. But she's in tune, so it's hard to say when somebody sees or experiences a particular phenomena. Oftentimes, other phenomena, as you fully well know, come into that person's life as well. If a person sees a UFO, they're more likely to see a ghost, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So, she's open.
I was thinking back to your family. You had the two older ones, and then yourself, and then two that had nothing. I wondered if you were to all do like a, Ancestry.com and do your DNA analysis, if you might find a connection between the three that had experiences and the cousin and the living ones on the whatever relative side you said, there might be some genetic correlation between those who had experiences and those who didn't. Because I don't know if you're aware, but people in the same family have different DNA. Because you pull your DNA from different sides of the family. So it might be an interesting experiment, although it probably costs several $100, $300-$500, depending on how many people you do it. It might be worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely.
You talk them into it. You have the most open family that I've heard of in a long time. Most people are very close, and my family wouldn't talk about it, obviously, but I know it was happening several generations back. But they weren't open to talk. They talk about it in secret, but nothing real open. So that it seems like you have a unique opportunity to do a little bit of scientific evaluation and what was at least going on in your family.
Yeah,
What's your thoughts?
sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
And for me, besides
any other?
Besides the UFO activity, I've certainly had my share of other experiences too. We had a friend who passed from cancer about a decade ago, and as he was in the very final phases of it, and he was in a coma, one night I woke up and I saw this shaft, to see a shaft of light at the foot of my bed, and I just looked at it, and it was just a simple shaft of light, but I knew it was my friend David, who was very, very sick at the time on his deathbed with cancer, and I knew it was him. And he says to me telepathically, he goes, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and whatever kills you makes you stronger. And then the light faded. And then the light faded. And so the next day I was calling around, I'm like, is David okay? Did he pass? I saw his ghost last night. And it turned out he didn't actually die until the next day. So, but other people said they had seen his spirit or felt his spirit as well, almost like while he was still semi-tethered to his physical form, he was doing sort of a goodbye tour, and then before he, crossed over the next day. So
I've heard of people doing that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they have like a foot in each world, and so they're able to come and contact people. Yeah. Sasha, do you have any questions or comments or things you want to add? We're almost out of the time.
No, but just the whole point is that many phenomena that have been separated into our intellectual categories are really part and parcel of the same thing, which is a dualism, the self and not self, and it really comes down to that. It's a spurious dichotomy made for the convenience of our limited intellects. That's what it seems like to me.
Mm-hmm. I'm hearing a pipe noise. I don't know if anybody else.
Yeah, I'm hearing feedback.
Sasha's speakers are up a little loud.
Oh.
Yeah, turn your speaker down. Thank you, dear. Okay, go ahead.
So, it seems to me that there's intentional spin and unintentional spin, and it goes back to point again to something I said. There is no really reliable way to discuss the phenomena, but it's even worse not to try. So, I mean, if that whole thing, what would, if you took like a cell phone back several centuries and showed somebody, what would they think about it? What words would they use to describe it? And how would they, talk about what is happening with it? And I think we find ourselves in that situation now. We are dealing with technologies that are so far in advance of our own that we can't, there is no language for it, but we have to talk about it because it's happening, because it's real. And just because we don't know the words for it, it's not like we can ignore it. And I think that one of the things that's interesting that's happening now is a lot of people say, well, people are a lot more open to the UFO phenomena now. And to some degree, I agree. The Hubble and Kepler telescopes finding all sorts of worlds that are potentially habitable, and water on Mars, just little things that sort of open up the aperture just a little bit of saying, yeah, there's action off this planet. That's certainly happening. But I think another thing is happening at the same time, which is people, I would think at one point, and I'm trying to find the best words to use for this, would be offended and think somebody else is crazy if that person told them a story of extraterrestrial contact. But now I kind of think it's just that people can't even be bothered. that you could tell them any sort of wild story and they would be like, oh, okay, and then they would be back on, within a few seconds on their cell phone playing whatever game or doing whatever social media or whatever. It's almost as if, like, as long as I have my technological pacifier, I don't care what other people say and think. I'm just into my little toy here that gives me constant gratification, and I don't think people look up anymore. And I think it's always funny when I hear somebody else say this too, is that people just don't look up. Like, say for example, just as an experiment, if the moon went away for a month, how many people would notice?
Right. Oh, I don't know. Well, with that in mind, how are you going to do a conference? You're doing a conference. What are the dates of your conference? We got about 5 minutes when you talk about the conference. The 50th anniversary. Are you going to be there?
Yeah, I will be there.
So tell us about the conference. Where is it and what are the dates?
It's going to be in Irvine, California. It's at the very end of July. I want to think the dates are the 25th through the 27th. If I'm off by a day, I'm off by a day, but it's that last weekend in July. You can go to mufonsymposium.com to get all the details. Now, a couple, if I had to pick out one highlight of this symposium, is that Stanton Friedman, who is giving the last presentation of the last day, the Sunday afternoon presentation, claims that this is his final public speaking presentation ever, that he is retiring from doing presentations after he does this talk. Now, people have told me, like, oh, Stanton Friedman doesn't do, talks anymore, and then I see him do talks. But this time, I really believe it. I mean, an auspicious event like the 50th anniversary of MUFON, and giving him the last word, it just feels right that this is probably going to be his last presentation. So it would be to be there at that and to be able to, applaud, after he's done so much over so many years, I think is kind of a special thing. And I would just say visit the website, mufonsymposium.com, to see all the other speakers. There's a real international flair to this year's event, UFOs all over the world, so check it out. And I would, like I said, I'm definitely going. 50th anniversary. To me, I'm a company man. I love MUFON. I've been a member of it for so long, and that I'm geeked about it.
Yeah, I wish I could go. Who knows? Maybe I'll only buy a plane ticket. But yeah, Stanton's great. You make sense. It's probably his last hurrah. He is going to say goodbye, and he's been waiting to retire for a couple of years. But I guess people keep saying, "Oh, come on, one more time, one more time, one more time." But I know it was getting hard on him. I would see him like in Contact in the desert. It was a lot there, and he's like, "Oh my goodness, how long can I do this?" So he served us well as a community. I'm going to stop talking. Can I get feedback? Okay, got 2 more minutes, so go ahead, Bill, talk and take us on out because I'm getting horrible feedback.
Okay. Sure. The website for MUFON is mufon.com, MUFON.com. The website for our Michigan, if you are in Michigan and want to attend one of our meetings, is mymufon.org. When I say my, I mean MIMUFON.org. My personal website that I would refer to if people are interested in my background story and my book is experiencer.me. That's experiencer.me. And Michigan has a nice conference coming up in September as well, UFO Contact 2. I would say look up Michigan UFO Contact 2, and I'm going to be a speaker on that lineup in September as well, September 20th and 21st.
Awesome. And your book, how can they get your book?
I would say Amazon generally is the best way to get a hold of it. I understand it's available through Barnes & Noble, and it's self-published. So lulu.com is my self-publisher if one wants to go that route. It's available both in paper and as well as PDF.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Well, we really thank you for coming on the show. You've been on a couple of our shows, and we missed it last week. But thank you so much for coming on and telling us all about yourself and your organization. And I do encourage people to join MUFON and report their stories and get your face out of the iPhone and the Android and look up. Take pictures with it. Okay, aloha. Love and blessings.
Thank you so much, Bill.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.